The security guard's hand was already reaching for his walkie-talkie when he heard the father's voice crack. "Please, my son is dying. He just wants to meet Johnny Cash." It was October 23rd, 1994, at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center in Nashville. 8,000 people had packed the venue to see the man in black perform one of his final major concerts. But outside the stage door, 42-year-old construction worker Tom Harrison was making the kind of desperate plea that only a parent watching their child slip away could make. "Sir, you need to step back," the security guard said, his voice firm but not unkind. He'd seen plenty of fans try every trick in the book to get backstage, but something about this man was different. Maybe it was the hospital bracelet still on his wrist. Maybe it was the way his hands shook as he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "This is from Vanderbilt Children's Hospital," Tom said, unfolding what turned out to be a doctor's note. "My son Jesse has leukemia. Stage 4. The doctors say he has maybe 2 weeks left." The security guard's expression softened, but rules were rules. "I'm sorry about your son, sir. I really am. But Mr. Cash doesn't do meet and greets anymore. His health isn't great either." Oh no. What Tom Harrison didn't know was that Johnny Cash, at 72 years old, was fighting his own battles. Diabetes had already taken most of the feeling in his feet. His eyesight was failing. The powerful voice that had once filled prisons and stadiums now required considerable effort to project beyond the microphone. His manager, Lou Robin, had strict instructions. No backstage visitors, no exceptions. Cash needed every ounce of energy just to get through the 90-minute show. But Tom Harrison wasn't leaving. He couldn't, not when his 12-year-old son was lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away, clutching a cassette tape of Ring of Fire that he'd played so many times the label had worn off. "You don't understand," Tom said, and now other people were starting to notice the commotion. "Jesse learned to play guitar listening to Johnny Cash records. When the chemo made his hair fall out, he asked for a black shirt so he could look like him. He was supposed to be here tonight, but he collapsed yesterday. The doctors won't let him leave the hospital." The security guard spoke into his radio, calling for backup, not to remove Tom Harrison, but because he didn't know what else to do. The desperation in this father's eyes was unlike anything he'd encountered in 15 years of venue security. That's when June Carter Cash appeared. She'd been heading to her husband's dressing room with a cup of honey tea for his throat when she heard the commotion. At 65, June still moved with the grace of the performer she'd been since childhood, but it was her eyes, those knowing, compassionate eyes, that made her stop. "What's going on here?" she asked, her Virginia accent soft but commanding. The security guard started to explain, but Tom Harrison interrupted. "Ma'am, my son is dying. He's 12 years old, and he loves your husband's music more than anything in this world. I know Mr. Cash is busy. I know he doesn't feel well. But if you could just tell him that Jesse Harrison wants to meet him, that's all I ask." June studied Tom's face for a long moment. She'd seen thousands of fans over the decades. She could spot the difference between starstruck admiration and genuine need. This was something else entirely. "Wait here," she said. In the dressing room, Johnny Cash was sitting in a chair, his eyes closed, trying to conserve energy before the show. The familiar pre-show pain in his stomach, a combination of nerves and health issues, was particularly bad tonight. When June entered, he opened one eye. "There's a father outside," June said simply. "His boy is dying, 12 years old. Cancer." Cash's jaw tightened. He'd lost his brother Jack when they were just boys. The pain of watching someone young slip away never left you, but he also knew his own limitations. Some nights he barely made it through the encore. "June, I can't. You know I can't. His name is Jesse. The boy learned guitar from your records." Cash was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Where is the boy?" "Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, 3 miles away." "How long until showtime?" 45 minutes. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments in Nashville music history, though it would take years for the full story to emerge. Johnny Cash stood up, steadying himself on June's arm, and said 5 words that would change multiple lives. "Get me a car, now." Lou Robin, Cash's manager, nearly had a heart attack when he found out. "Johnny, you can't be serious. 8,000 people are waiting. The promoters will sue." "Your health, Lou," Cash said, his voice carrying that deep authority that had made prison wardens step aside. "I'm going to see that boy." The car ride to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital took 11 minutes. Cash sat in the back, June holding his hand, neither of them speaking. The driver, a young production assistant named Marcus Williams, would later tell reporters he'd never felt such heavy silence in his life. They entered through the emergency room to avoid attention, but even hunched over, wearing a simple black coat and moving slowly, Johnny Cash was impossible to miss. Nurses stopped mid-stride, doctors forgot what they were saying. But Cash moved forward with purpose, June guiding him toward the pediatric oncology ward. Jesse Harrison's room was at the end of a long hallway decorated with children's drawings. Many featured guitars and musical notes. The nurse outside his door, Patricia Coleman, had been working pediatric oncology for 20 years. She'd seen celebrities visit before, usually quick photo ops arranged by publicists. This was different. "He's very weak," she warned quietly. "He might not even wake up." Cash nodded and entered the room. Jesse Harrison looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. The machines surrounding him beeped steadily, monitoring vital signs that were slowly, inexorably declining. His head, bald from chemotherapy, was turned toward the window. On the nightstand sat a worn cassette player and a stack of Johnny Cash tapes. Cash lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, his own pain forgotten. He reached out and gently took Jesse's hand. It was so small, so cold. "Jesse," he said softly. "Jesse, it's Johnny Cash." The boy's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was confusion, then recognition, then something that Jesse's father, who had just arrived after receiving a frantic call from the hospital, would later describe as pure joy. "You came," Jesse whispered. "Of course I came," Cash said. "I heard you've been learning guitar." Jesse nodded weakly. "I learned Folsom Prison Blues. Want to hear it?" "More than anything." With tremendous effort, Jesse reached for a small acoustic guitar propped in the corner. His father rushed to help, placing it gently in his son's lap. Jesse's fingers, thin and trembling, found the familiar chords. His voice was barely above a whisper, but he sang, "I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling round the bend." Johnny Cash did something then that everyone in the room would remember for the rest of their lives. He began to sing along, his legendary voice soft and gentle, harmonizing with this dying 12-year-old boy. June joined in, her harmony adding a third layer to this impromptu performance that no audience would ever pay to see, but was perhaps the most important of Cash's career. When they finished, there were tears streaming down Tom Harrison's face. Patricia Coleman, the veteran nurse who thought she'd seen everything, was openly weeping. Even Marcus Williams, standing in the doorway, had to turn away to compose himself. But Johnny Cash wasn't done. "Jesse," he said, "I've got a show to do in about 20 minutes, 8,000 people waiting. But here's what I'm thinking. How about you come with me?" "Johnny," June said softly, "he can't leave the hospital." Cash looked at the medical equipment, the IV lines, the monitors. Then he looked at Jesse's face, alive with hope for the first time in weeks. "Then we bring the show here," Cash said. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary 20 minutes in the history of Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. Cash pulled out his guitar, the black acoustic he'd carried for 30 years. He positioned himself on the edge of Jesse's bed and began to play. He started with Ring of Fire, Jesse's favorite. By the second verse, nurses from other floors had gathered in the hallway. Doctors abandoned their rounds. Other sick children, those who could walk or be wheeled, appeared in the doorway. Cash played Walk the Line. He played Jackson with June. He played Sunday Morning Coming Down and Man in Black. His voice, which had been struggling in recent performances, seemed to find new strength. Or maybe it was just that in this small hospital room, singing for a dying boy and a growing crowd of people who needed this moment more than any concert, Johnny Cash remembered why he'd started singing in the first place. Between songs, he told stories about his childhood in Arkansas, about his brother Jack, about the time he played Folsom Prison and an inmate threw a watch on stage. Jesse laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. "You know what, Jesse?" Cash said after finishing Hurt, his latest single that was climbing the charts. "I played for presidents and prisoners. I played the Grand Ole Opry and Carnegie Hall. But this right here, this is the most important show I've ever done." Meanwhile, at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center, 8,000 people were getting restless. It was now 15 minutes past showtime. Lou Robin was pacing backstage, fielding angry calls from promoters. The band was vamping, playing instrumental versions of Cash songs to keep the crowd from leaving. Then Marcus Williams burst in. "You need to put me on the mic," he said. "Are you insane?" Lou Robin replied. "We're already facing a disaster. Trust me, put me on the mic." Reluctantly, Robin signaled to the sound engineer. Marcus Williams, 23 years old and terrified, walked onto the stage of the Tennessee Performing Arts Center and faced 8,000 increasingly frustrated Johnny Cash fans. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice shaking, "Johnny Cash is not here right now. He's at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital singing for a 12-year-old boy named Jesse Harrison who has 2 weeks to live." The arena went completely silent. Marcus continued, gaining confidence. "Jesse learned to play guitar from Johnny's records. When he lost his hair from chemo, he wore black to look like his hero. Right now, Johnny Cash is sitting on that boy's hospital bed, playing every song Jesse wants to hear. He's not coming back for the show tonight." Someone in the crowd started to boo. Others joined in. But then something extraordinary happened. From the back of the arena, one person started clapping. Slowly, deliberately, others joined. Within 30 seconds, all 8,000 people were on their feet, applauding. "He said to tell you," Marcus continued, now having to shout over the ovation, "that he'll make it up to you. Every ticket holder tonight will get a free ticket to his next show, but right now, he's where he needs to be." The crowd erupted, not in anger but in approval. Several people were crying, others were hugging strangers. In a moment that would be talked about in Nashville for years, 8,000 Johnny Cash fans chose compassion over entertainment. Back at the hospital, Cash had been playing for nearly an hour. Jesse had drifted in and out of consciousness, but his hand never let go of Cash's. The crowd in the hallway had grown to over 100 people. Patients, families, staff. Someone had called a local news station, but security kept them outside. Finally, exhausted and in considerable pain himself, Cash played one last song, "The Man Comes Around," a new composition about judgment and redemption. As he sang the final verse, Jesse opened his eyes and looked directly at him. "Mr. Cash?" Jesse said, his voice barely audible. "Yes, son? Am I going to die?" The room went absolutely still. Tom Harrison started to speak, but Cash raised his hand gently. "We're all going to die someday, Jesse. But you know what? The music doesn't die. Every song you've learned, every note you've played, that keeps going. Long after we're gone, the music keeps playing." Jesse smiled. "Will you remember me?" Cash's voice broke. This 72-year-old legend who had faced down his own demons, who had sung in prisons and palaces, who had lived enough life for 10 men, had to take a moment before he could answer. "Jesse, I'm going to tell you something. I've met thousands of people in my life, presidents and inmates, saints and sinners. But I promise you, I will never forget Jesse Harrison. Never." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a guitar pick. It was worn smooth from decades of use, the black paint chipped away to reveal brass underneath. "This pick," Cash said, pressing it into Jesse's palm, "has been with me since 1968. It's played every major show I've done. Now it's yours. And every time you hold it, remember that Johnny Cash believes in you." Jesse clutched the pick to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for coming." Cash stood to leave, June helping him up, but before he reached the door, Jesse called out one more time. "Mr. Cash, will you come to my funeral?" Tom Harrison gasped. June's hand flew to her mouth. Even the nurses seemed shocked by the directness of the question, but Johnny Cash turned around, walked back to the bed, and looked Jesse straight in the eye. "I'll make you a deal, Jesse. If I'm still around, I'll come to your funeral. But if I go first, you come to mine. Either way, we'll see each other again." Jesse smiled. "Deal." As Cash and June left the hospital, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had just happened, the raw humanity of it, was too much for words. They drove back to their home in Hendersonville in silence. The next morning, every newspaper in Tennessee carried the story. Cash misses concert for dying boy. 8,000 fans applaud empty stage. The night the man in black showed his heart. But the story wasn't over. Jesse Harrison lived not 2 weeks but 6 more weeks. Every day he held that guitar pick. He played his guitar when he had the strength. He listened to Cash's music when he didn't. Tom Harrison later said those 6 weeks were a gift, that his son had found a peace that had eluded him during months of treatment. When Jesse finally passed on December 4th, 1994, it was quiet and peaceful. He was holding the guitar pick. Ring of Fire was playing softly on the cassette player. Johnny Cash kept his promise. Despite his manager's protests and his own failing health, he attended Jesse Harrison's funeral. He didn't perform. This wasn't a show. He sat in the back row, June beside him, as they celebrated the life of a 12-year-old boy who had loved music more than anything. After the service, Cash approached Tom Harrison. "Your boy was special," he said simply. "Don't let anyone tell you different." "He died happy," Tom replied, tears streaming down his face. "Because of you, he died happy." Cash shook his head. "No, he died brave. That's all him." The story could end there, but there's more. 3 months after Jesse's funeral, Johnny Cash established the Jesse Harrison Music Foundation, dedicated to bringing music education to children in hospitals. He personally funded it with $1 million. Today, that foundation has provided instruments and lessons to over 10,000 sick children. But perhaps the most remarkable epilogue came 9 years later. Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003. At his funeral at First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, attended by the biggest names in music and politics, there was one floral arrangement that stood out. It was a simple wreath of white roses with a card that read, "Keeping our deal. See you soon, Jesse." Tom Harrison had sent it, because even though his son had been gone for 9 years, a promise was a promise. June Carter Cash, who would pass away just 4 months after her husband, later told an interviewer that of all the incredible things she'd seen Johnny do in their 35 years of marriage, that night at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital was when she loved him most. "He was in such pain himself," she said. "His diabetes, his eyesight, all of it. But he sat on that hospital bed and sang like he was 25 again, not for money, not for fame, but because a dying boy needed to know he mattered." The 8,000 people who missed the concert that night, not one asked for a refund. In fact, many sent additional donations to Jesse's treatment fund. The Tennessee Performing Arts Center received letters for months from audience